Let me share my screen as I get started here. I'm actually no longer averaging one book a week. I did that for about 2 years, and I found myself a slave to the goal rather than enjoying the goal. So I pulled back on it a little bit, but it's now maybe one every week and a half. So thanks for having me today. What we're talking about today is how GitLab makes Agile shine with developers spread across 65 countries. I have a couple slides, but I'm not going to deluge the group with slides. I'm going to click in and show some things live as well. And please do feel free, questions at the end are great. Questions in chat are sometimes a little hard to notice, but feel free to do that or interrupt me and ask questions as we go. I'm happy to make this an interactive discussion. So quick blurb on GitLab. GitLab is the one DevOps platform from planning to production, bring teams together in one application, ships secure code faster, deploy to any cloud, and drive business results. I'll also make these slides available. I'm not sure how to do that with this group, Pepe, but I'll send you the PDF later so you can make it available with the group. And as I click on links here, GitLab is a very transparent company, and it's primarily an open source product. So you'll actually see a lot of details inside, but I'm not sharing any proprietary information. We do have proprietary information, but if you see me clicking on issues and merge requests and code, et cetera, it's in our handbook. I'm only going to click on public things. In fact, I have a incognito window here for this. So a little bit about the company, separate from the product. Is we have 1,700 employees in 65 countries and regions. Been all remote since close to the beginning in 2015. We have 0 offices. And it's an open source product that gets thousands of contributions every year from close to 1,000 different people in the community. So we not only get things from quite a bit of work, of course, from our employees and team members, but also from the community. The product is delivered via software as a service in the cloud, and also software users can run themselves. There are free versions and also paid versions that are available with added features. And not only is the product based on open source, but our company handbook is also largely public. So a bit about the values. And
so, wait, quick pause.
Sure.
Because you're gonna talk a lot about the efficiencies and the fact that GitLab has been remote since 2015. Let's do the poll now.
Let's do it.
All right.
Great. So you might see this list of company values and go, oh yeah, I have similar things. Do people actually really pay attention to this? And at previous companies I worked at, people would pay attention to value somewhat. New employees would, we'd talk about them monthly, maybe quarterly. But as an all remote company, GitLab really lives by these values because we all remote company that's spread all over the world is we have different cultures based on being all over the world. We have we also often can't all meet at the same time because of how distributed we are. So the values are how the company operates, and we call each other on these values. If we see something, if you want to figure out how to operate, you look at the values, and that helps you. Or if you see something that's somebody's not operating according to the values, it's expected. It's not only okay, it's expected to nudge them on it and send them a link like, hey, you did this. And according to our collaboration value, maybe you should consider doing Y. And we really do live by these things because if you don't operate according to your values, they don't really matter. And I'm going to talk about the values in terms of how they help Agile, and specifically, although these are the values for the company across the entire company, not just engineering or development. And again, this is in our handbook, which is all public. So you can see these as well. So in terms of our values, starts with collaboration. So I'm not going to read this, but I'm going to take things out of this. Is we work really hard to collaborate across the company. So inside engineering, inside development, across teams, Developers will often collaborate on how the company operates in the handbook. We'll get feedback from our developer evangelism team, from our support team in development, for example, from marketing, from sales. And it really helps to achieve things. So we try to be, under collaboration, we try to be kind to people. We also try to share as much as possible. So not keep secrets or keep things intentionally, unintentionally away from you, so we can really collaborate. And I'm always astounded from coming from a company that was a security company before GitLab to GitLab is when you open things up, how much collaboration can really help things and really strengthen things. From people you've never worked with before, or if you did, you never knew they'd have an idea on something. So negative feedback is one-on-one. We give praise in public and negative feedback generally in private. Providing feedback quickly in a timely manner so people really get it as they work, and also say thanks. As I mentioned, we have a thanks channel in Slack. It's one of my favorite channels at GitLab to see this person thanking that person or that group for doing something, which is great. Giving feedback effectively, and make it about the work, not about the person. Getting to know each other. We do a lot of text-based communication. So having informal communication, we do a lot of coffee chats to catch up with people. We have, we don't call them birds of a feather, I forget the name of them, but people of common interest getting together, whether it's in Slack or in Zoom or other things on various topics. We have employee resource groups on various things. We have people talking about science fiction, people talking about skiing, people talking about music, both making music and listening to music. And those are great to get to know people, especially reaching across departments. Another key one is assuming positive intent. Oh my goodness, when you communicate in writing primarily, it's really easy to read something into something that isn't there. So you really try hard to assume positive intent in your interactions. And that really helps Agile as well, especially with engineers that may take a comment as sniping, as overly critical when it really wasn't intended that way. This is a hard one, but very hard one because it can be very emotional, but it's a very important one. Saying sorry, no ego. Let's see, blameless problem solve. When there's a problem, we try to do a blameless root cause analysis. We actually based our root cause analysis program on the or process based on what Spotify published years ago, which was a great start. That's really key, not only at the company in general, but in engineering. Short toes, meaning make them hard to step on, so that keeping feelings in check and not getting upset about things if you can avoid it, which is about Gordon's problem solving and assuming positive intent. And let's see if there's anything else under here. So that's key on collaboration. It's specific to Agile as well. Any questions about that before I move on to results or comments? So a key thing, something in chat. Let me see here. Oh, thanks. I see the notes. So results. This is key for Agile as well. We measure results, not hours. Let me say that again. We measure results, not hours. We don't look at how many hours people work or when they work those hours. We look at what are the results in terms of number of merge requests or AKA pull requests. We look at the number of what is the availability of systems, what is the error budget versus what the actual errors are in terms of availability and error rates. Look at the success of features, in terms of users using them, their satisfaction with them. We also use our own product. We call that dog fooding. We try to use our own product since we are a development company as well. We develop software for a living as well. It's really key in terms of another key thing. Although we sometimes can over-index on that, where our needs are not necessarily as a software developer, company that develops software for a living, our needs are not necessarily exactly what our customers' needs are. So, and sometimes we assume that, in my opinion. So that's something we try to keep an eye on and not have a bias towards that. Customer results. Our focus is to improve our customers' results, not necessarily, that is very important in addition to our own. Writing promises down, think about that in Agile, is if you don't write down a goal, it doesn't really mean much. It's forgotten. We, sense of urgency is, if we don't have a sense of urgency on important things, then we're not working on those things. We try to be ambitious and have hairy, what is it called? Hairy, outrageous goals. I'm missing some letters in that acronym, but we do try to have ambitious goals and not set the bars too low, but also know we're not going to meet every goal we set. Bias for action is key in terms of Agile. Disagree, commit, and disagree. So it's okay to disagree. We want to hear people's divergent or alternate opinions. But then after the directly responsible individual, the DRI, which is one of the other things here that comes up, makes a decision, we ask everyone to commit to the decision, continuing to disagree and giving feedback. But if we can't commit to things, even if there's disagreement, then we can't make progress on them. And that's really, really important, I think, in general, but also in Agile. Who makes the decision on various things and then committing to them and moving forward, but while still taking feedback. Let's see here, anything else under results? Now, those are the primary things under results. I'm going to pause there for a second. So there's just a couple of these. We've gone through two, but I think these are important to talk about how they impact our ability to really do well with Agile. Efficiency, writing things down. I kind of mentioned that earlier. Is if you don't write it down, it doesn't exist. And in my opinion, and in fact, we write things down in issues in GitLab because we use our own product, in merge requests, also known as pull requests, and in the handbook, where any employee of GitLab can update the handbook. Not everybody can merge those changes. We have approval processes on who can merge changes in various portions. Like on this page, I happen to know the CEO and the CEO's chief of staff, the primary people who merge changes to our values. Values are pretty important to the company. Just happen to know that because they're up here. That's their pictures. But we want everything written down so that it exists long term, and a single source of truth for everything. We call that an SSOT. We like boring solutions. They shouldn't be conflated with bad or technical debt. It shouldn't be a lot more than what we need. That's very key in the company overall and in our Agile processes. Being respectful for other people's time is key. So when we do have meetings, which we do have them, they start on time. Literally, they start on time. If not everybody's there, that's fine. If we record most meetings, so people who weren't there at all or weren't there at the beginning can watch the recording if they want. We also take really good notes. We have great, we have a culture of having agendas for meetings and detailed notes in them, but we really want to be respectful of others' time. Let's see here. Other key things related to Agile. Embracing change is important to the company. These are very general, of course, in terms of, I'm going to go through some very specific examples for my teams. But those are key in terms of efficiency. The fourth of six, not going to go forever on these, of our values: diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And this is really key. And I never really realized it until how important this was till I was at GitLab and really got into the culture and started working at the company for a while. A bias towards asynchronous communication opens up so much, where it makes it that people in different time zones can participate because things are asynchronous, aka in writing, and really have a voice. People who are not good at speaking in meetings because it makes them nervous, or we primarily operate in English, but we have people where English is their second language, and communicating and writing really helps to inclusively bring them in. It lets people also who like to really think about things before they comment be a part of the team and fully participate in something. So that's very, very important. I mean, also all sorts of important things in here, like seeking diverse perspectives, making family feel welcome, shifting working hours for a cause, being a mentor. We do quite a bit of mentorship at GitLab, inside engineering and outside engineering. Example, I do something where there's an engineering director mentorship program where anybody at GitLab can sit in on most of my meetings for a week. I call it the Engineering Director Shadow Program, which is based on inspired by the CEO who does something similar at GitLab. And I learn a lot from it. I ask for feedback from my shadows and they learn a lot as well. So mentorship is very important. Making people safe is important. So they have psychological safety. If people don't have psychological safety at work, it's night and day difference in terms of how happy they are and how great of a job they do. And there's various different forms of psychological safety, but one is, microaggressions, avoiding those, calling people on them when they do it, not having unconscious bias on things, using inclusive pronouns and language, having inclusive meetings so that people can attend and participate in various ways. Embracing neurodiversity was something I wasn't that familiar with when I started at GitLab, but I now am through that. So family and friends first and work second is a key one as well in terms of safety. People don't apologize because their dog is barking in the background or because, oh, my child needs my attention. People actually like put kids in their lap while working sometimes and on Zoom. And or people don't apologize that they have to go, they have a delivery and they have to go downstairs. It's kind of part of how the company operates. And it's great. People don't apologize for those things. I'm going to pause there for a second before I go into iteration. So iteration is doing the smallest thing possible and getting it out as quickly as possible. So that's company-wide, whether it's a new process on how the company operates in the people team, or in sales, or in marketing, and in engineering as well. And this is really powerful and sometimes really challenging in our engineering teams. Is we feature flag quite a bit of what we do so that we can roll it out quickly. And we also make it as small as possible. Making it as small as possible makes it easier to review and release. We do many releases a day to production. It also allows us to turn things off if they cause a problem with a quick feature flag change. And it also allows us you don't really know how something's going to be received, how it's going to work or not. You do your best to plan for that, but doing as small as possible lets you iterate quickly. And it's a key tenet of the company in engineering and outside engineering. And it's hard for people to learn because many organizations want to gold plate things and spend months on them before releasing them, perhaps. But by the time you release it, it may not meet the needs anymore, and you're not getting a lot of feedback. So the teams have cover from the leadership that things may not go perfectly, and it may not be gold plated. There might be a typo in something. The colors might be off. The UI might not be great, or the back end might not work in all cases. But we want to iterate on things and make it as small as possible to improve on things. And it really is a game changer, in my opinion. In terms of iteration, setting due dates to have a line drawn on. You don't always meet that due date, but you do try to set one to have an expectation. We don't call this a deadline. We used to, but we actually got some feedback that was non-inclusive based on the derivation of the word deadline, where that comes from. So just calling that as an example of that's something we changed. Minimal viable changes, MVCs. Part of iteration is we encourage MVCs to be as small as possible. We may do the front end change before the back end change and feature flag it so it's not available to users until the back end is available. Or we might release the front end change and mark it as beta, or say this is not ready yet, this is coming soon. Or we may need the back end change before the front end change, and it's available for users via API, but not via the front end, even if that's what might be intended. But that's okay, because we want the teams to be able to work iteratively with minimal viable changes so we can iterate on things, which is really key. Let's see here. Other key things for two-way door decisions, meaning most decisions are easy to reverse. We want to be able to make changes and reverse them if needed and not ask for approval. Oh my gosh, as we all know, when you ask for approval, it's really easy for people to say no. And it's really hard for them sometimes it's very hard for them to say yes, because they're worried about the concern. So we designate, figure out who the directly responsible individual is, the DRI, and they take feedback from everyone and comment on it, respond to it. They don't necessarily need to do it, address all the feedback, but then we want to make decisions two-way door whenever possible, where we can roll them back. If they're one-way door decisions, we think a little bit harder about them before we do them, like signing a contract to buy a new service where it's very expensive and there's security risks to be looked at, et cetera. It's a two-way door, but it's an expensive two-way door. So I consider that a one-way door. Or we're removing a feature and we need to tell users about it. We're deprecating a feature. That's a one-way door decision because it has a lot of impact to users. Although I guess we could bring it back, but most decisions we try to design to make them two-way doors so we can roll them back if needed and not need a challenging approval process. And iteration is so important and so challenging sometimes. Our CEO and one of the other original employees of the company, one of the first 10 or 15, they do a all hands optional ask me anything session, AMA session, with all employees about iteration. And they talk about how the company succeeded early on with iteration, but also take feedback. Like, I'm working on this thing, I want to do it more iteratively. How can I do that? And it's really interesting. Iteration, more on iteration. I'm going to pause there before talking about the last one. There's more detail in our values, but the last one, transparency. But any questions? I've seen lots of things in the chat that look mostly like notes. So I'm not catching questions there. So feel free, if you have questions or comments, to verbalize them on audio.
A question, if you don't mind going
Please.
back, Wayne. Can you explain a little bit more about how the teams, like, do the teams have overlap to work together? And how you're doing it at Git? Using tools like Slack or using other tools? How, like you might have team members in India ending their day at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, for instance. How are you accounting for, they're offline, to the next day, and vice versa? They may have questions for the team that are now gone home on the East Coast or in the US.
How do you address, make sure I understand, how do you address time zone overlap or the lack thereof when teams are working together?
Yeah, I guess that's part of it. How are you addressing that type of issue?
Yeah, and we do that in various ways. So we do not organize teams, and actually I didn't put this in the slides, but I meant to, so I'm really glad you brought it up. We do not locate teams in the same time zones. So like I have my total teams are probably about 50 people with various managers and senior managers, et cetera. And we try to have the maximum number of team members for any manager at no more than 8. And most teams are not in the same time zones. In fact, many teams have people that have zero overlap between the team members. And for there, we try to work very iteratively and document things well. in writing and in issues in the GitLab product itself, which we use, it's our product, we use it to develop the product, in merge requests or pull requests, in Slack sometimes, in Google Docs sometimes as well. And so that everybody knows what's going on. And it takes a little more to document, but it really strengthens things. And we will record meetings as well. So people who couldn't attend a meeting can not only read the notes from it or even put notes in, even if they can't attend. We'll actually verbalize what they said. Someone will volunteer to verbalize it so that it has a voice. And then we discuss it in the meeting, and then they can watch the recording later. That helps with agile teams, developers coordinating with each other. If it's support issues where there's a customer escalation, for example, or an outage, or an infrastructure incident, we have on-call rotation to make sure that we're well covered, and it's on a per team basis based on specific skills. And there's also a team that is primarily responsible for that. And we have rotations to make that work. And it's interesting when those things happen is often people are brought in that don't know that much about the components. We get the people that know about the things in question, but also others collaborating on it. And it's amazing. Sometimes it sends us off on tangents, but it's also sometimes amazing that they have great ideas on how to resolve those incidents or look into new things. And it works out quite well.
All right, thank you. Do you have working agreements then for the maybe about the team members that can't attend, meetings with, the rest of the team or the majority of the team? Like you mentioned about notes and stuff like that. Do you use like maybe working agreements or something? How do they know or how do they put their voice into the meetings they couldn't attend?
Yeah, it's great, Jerry. So we don't have meetings without agendas. And generally the meeting is not about reviewing something. We almost never have meetings, but please review this document. I'm going to review these slides live, and then we're going to talk about it. We never have that meeting, almost never. We aspire to never have that meeting. What we have is we'll publish something in advance. Say, please read this before the meeting and come to the meeting with questions. And in fact, if it's an important topic, somebody will record a video talking through the slides that people can watch or not. And then people come to the meeting with questions or comments, and not everybody can read it in advance, but comments in advance, whether they're going to attend the meeting or not. And if they don't, that's fine. They can read the slides while we're going through the questions that people have. And occasionally somebody will schedule a meeting and say, oh, let's go through the slides in this meeting. And they get politely called on that, saying, no, we're not going to do that. People should read them in advance. And if they didn't, that's fine. Let's go to the questions, but that helps. So if somebody can't attend a meeting because it's not at a good time for them, whether it's their working hours or not, sometimes it's during their working hours, but they're, picking up their kids from school or went out for a run or et cetera, they put in their notes in advance in the meeting, and we will read them out loud. Someone will volunteer to read them out loud, and then we'll discuss their question or comment. And it's not perfect, but it really does help so that people who can't attend a meeting can still participate in one.
Thank you for that. Just curious too, that teams that do Scrum, they're assuming you do Scrum.
Some do Scrum, some do Kanban. It's kind of on a per team basis.
Stuff like daily Scrum, same type, what like the other meetings they put in what maybe the 3 questions or something, or whatever format the team decides to do.
Each engineering team tends to have a weekly meeting, and they will either do it twice if they have people across time zones and they want to, or they'll alternate it between every other week. It'll change the time of day so that everyone has an opportunity to attend it, live in at least one. And so we do weekly team meetings of the Scrum or Kanban teams. And then we also use in Slack various bots to basically just do a daily stand-up where, what did you do? What did you do yesterday? What are you planning to do today? Are you blocked on anything? And do you have any appreciation for anyone or on anything? And some teams do that last question, some don't. And that really helps teams to get up to speed and know what's going on a daily basis. So we basically do daily stand-ups in Slack, facilitated by a bot. One of the bots one of my teams uses is GeekBot. It happens to be what it's called, though they may have changed their name, but there's a couple other ones as well.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to monopolize.
No, absolutely. I'm accused sometimes of loving hearing my own voice, so I love the questions, and it's great. The more this is a conversation and less a presentation, the better, because I learn a lot from these discussions too. So transparency. We are, in my opinion, radically transparent as a company and as an engineering team. We've got a primarily open source product, and inside the company, not everything is viewable to everybody at the company, but a lot of it is. You can really learn a lot, and it makes it psychologically safe. You don't have to guess about what's going on. You can go find it. And also, we're very transparent publicly. Not 100%, of course, but we get feedback from the general public, from users, from people who just like GitLab, people who don't like GitLab as well, about how we operate as a company. And this handbook that you're seeing, this is all public. And this page is all public. And it really helps us improve. And it's amazing the feedback we get. An example is one of my teams released a new feature. And it was an important feature related to authentication to the product. And if you break user authentication, people get unhappy. And we broke user authentication for a small percentage of users under very certain circumstances, but we did. And we got feedback from the users in our forum that's just public. And before we got a chance to comment, a different user had a solution for us, had a workaround for that user, which they published to the community. And we also commented on what we found what the issue was. It had to do with certain browser plugins that weren't compatible with some of the changes we made. And we said, oh, thank you. You told us which ones. We're now working on it. Here's the issue. And they could see the issue. And here's the merge request that we're working on to fix it, both of which happen to be, we're able to make public. And we got users commenting on those too from the general community, whether they were paid users or free users. I'm actually not even sure. They don't actually care, but it was great to get feedback from the user community on those. And that's where such the power of transparency is so important. So we're public by default, which not all companies can do, of course, but GitLab does that. There are things that are not public, things like financial info, customer specific info, but quite a bit of what we do is public. We try to have a single source of truth, which makes it we don't duplicate information. Even if that makes it easier to read one page, to duplicate it, what we found is if you do that, you have to find and update it everywhere when you update it, and that's not easy to do. So we will do a lot of cross-referencing so that there's a single source of truth. Say why, not just what. That's really important. When doing Agile as well, you don't want to just tell people what to do, you want to tell them why it's important. So they know the reasoning for something and how it helps customers or how it helps users, so they can really get buy-in and also perhaps and often better ideas than if on how to actually accomplish that why. Let's see here. Yeah, so those are the primary values. And what I highlighted a couple of things on how that really helps Agile at GitLab. So we talk about collaboration, results, efficiency, diversity, inclusion and belonging, iteration, and transparency. So next we'll talk about the product development flow at GitLab, where we have a specific way to track work from inception to production to everything in between. So we have ideas, and this is actually documented in our handbook. I'll bring that up in a second. We have ideas, we collect ideas in the validation backlog. We do problem validation. Our user design team does that, and our research team to understand the problem. We prototype it. Figma and other related screenshots and screen flows are great. We test it with users. We break down the work. We build it, we test it, we launch it to users, and then we measure it, error rates, availability, user happiness, performance, et cetera, and improve it when we ship it. Going a little more detail on that for the product development flow page, which is mentioned anybody can contribute, even the public can, but this page is maintained by our leaders in product management. So you see our workflow summary here. I just pasted it into the slides. We have some key things here is we use various labels in issues and epics, like to identify where things are in the process. And I'm going to show you some examples for some of our projects that show this. So we start out with workflow validation backlog. We have directly responsible individuals for each step in the process, who's collaborates on things, who's informed, kind of classic RACI, responsible, accountable, consultative, informed process. This is a very big handbook page, but we go into detail on each one. Then we do problem validation. The DRI is the product manager. Validation design, we do workflow design. Now the DRI goes to the product designer, somebody on the UX team. We have different collaborators and inform people. Solution validation and so on. And then it gets down to, I'm going to jump down to where the build track is. And let's say like phase one, this is where the Scrum Masters, or we don't have explicit Scrum Masters, but that's kind of what the engineering managers do. Workflow for planning breakdown, workflow for ready for development. There's then phase two with develop and test, where things go from in dev to in review. And I'll go workflow blocked. So we know an issue is blocked on something, when it's in verification, might be awaiting security release, and then launch. We have various labels with different DRIs. On workflow verification, workflow production, et cetera. And then we also improve things. So lots of process and DRIs with things crossing across directly responsible individuals, DRI boundaries. And do we follow this to a T on every team perfectly? Absolutely not. Even the team, but teams primarily do this, and then they customize it for their own needs and interests. And overall, it works pretty well. So I'm going to jump back to just the overview of the process here. Any questions or comments about this?
When you mentioned in the sort of like in the feedback mechanism, you mentioned happiness metric, but I missed in which context. Was that from the users or the team? Can you elaborate on that, please?
That's a good point. It's both. We do, and I'll go into more of this later, for the employees working on things. We do retrospectives every month. We to get feedback from the team, and then we also do 360 reviews. We do also kind of culture surveys every 3 to 6 months across the company to get feedback on how teams are feeling on a per team, per release, per manager kind of basis. And we also get a lot of feedback from users, some of it direct, like how much is this feature used? We also poll our users via inline surveys and emailed surveys, and we also take their feedback kind of more iteratively, perhaps that's the way to describe it, in our forum, where people can post our public forum where users can give us feedback. And we monitor social media very closely, Twitter, LinkedIn, the Hacker News website, Reddit, and other places, looking for feedback. Can we respond to everybody? Can we try to read everything? Do we respond to everybody? No, we try to respond to quite a bit of it. Can we do whatever everyone wants? No, but we always, and users also give us feedback in issues and in MRs and comments and creating issues. But we every bit of feedback that's appropriate to respond to, which is like 99% of it, we really try to thank them for their feedback, tell them what we agree with and what we don't, and then what we can do, what we're planning to do and what we're not planning to do. which that doesn't make everybody happy in terms of the net result, but we want them always to know that their feedback was listened to. And knowing that we can't make everybody happy, but it's a fascinating process for me, coming from a company that I was at previously that was not able to be transparent and take feedback in public like this because of the nature of the type of company that was in the security space.
Thank you.
I didn't mention NPS, Net Promoter Score. We do a lot of Net Promoter Score surveying of users as well. That's part of the user surveys, and we monitor those closely. Jerry, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, you mentioned the feedback from the users and stuff like that. How do you determine, or GitLab determine what to work on? The features, is it the highest amount of interest in a particular, say, new feature, or do you ask that, would, you know, as a customer, are you interested if we did this feedback type thing and collect a poll or something, or?
But we will poll users and get their feedback. We don't use pure voting to set the backlog priority. However, the product managers or the DRIs, directly responsible individuals for that, and they take all of the feedback, including user feedback, if we do any voting on things and surveys, that what the impact is to the business, what the impact is to future plans. And the product managers have a very challenging job of trying to take all of that feedback and figure out what makes it to the top in terms of priorities. And it includes, feedback from the employees on the team, on technical debt. Like if we don't do this change, we're gonna, have issues in 6 months, or our velocity is gonna continue to be slower than we want it to be because we want to refactor something. They'll take feedback from the infrastructure team on availability and error budgets, and they take all of those things and figure out what the best things are to do. Not really an answer, Jerry, but it's the product managers, the DRI, and they take all those inputs.
Yeah, so they make the decisions, that's all. Thank you.
Mhm.
This is curious.
Nope, good stuff. So, life cycle of a code change. A lot of text here. Apologize for that. I know I'm breaking one of the cardinal rules of slides, but these are all my notes. So developers work with their managers to choose items from the prioritized backlog. This is from the development perspective after product management prioritizes the backlog. Development is broken up into separate front end and back end tasks for tracking issues. Some developers work on both types, some specialize. Developers create merge requests for their code changes. New functionality is controlled by a feature flag. Once the merge requests are code complete and automated test cases are succeeding, the merge requests are submitted for the review process, which we have documented publicly. The code is then reviewed by reviewers who are often on the same teams at the author, and their feedback is considered and addressed. After the changes the reviewer approved, they're reviewed by the maintainers. There's a specific set of criteria we have for maintainers to make sure they're keeping an eye on quality and maintainability and reliability, et cetera. We have maintainers with specific focuses, such as front end, back end, database, and security. And they're pulled in, they're tagged based on the type of change, whether it's front end change, a back end change, database, some combination. After the changes are approved by maintainers, the code is deployed to staging and then to production. And all of the changes for each release are compiled and released monthly for self-hosted customers. We have both an online service and we have people who run GitLab themselves, and we do monthly releases. We'll do more than monthly for dot releases as needed, like if there's a critical security release, but generally we do monthly releases. So I'm going to pause there for a second because that's a mouthful. So I'm going to go through one from one of my teams. So it's nice to talk about these things in general. And there's a team called the Threat Insights team, Secure Threat Insights team, which is one of the teams that's my responsibility. And we have a Slack channel, and this Slack channel is private, but you can see what our priorities are. You can see some graphs on patch due issues of various types. That's a little too zoomed in to be viewable. various trends on merge requests and how much time we're spending on features versus maintenance, et cetera. What I'm going to go down to is our workflow, and I have an issue board. So let's go to the Thread Insights delivery board. Now you're going to see some of these labels I mentioned earlier. So this is showing what things are in design versus validation versus planning breakdown, refinement. If it's blocked, it's ready for development as terms of those labels I was talking about earlier, in review all the way into production. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for this, milestone is 14. I'll go to a previous release. So I can show something that's gone all the way through the process. So it might be a good one here in the one that's already done. So let's say, let's look at this one. I didn't vet these in advance. It's kind of nice to do it in advance. So here's one. We wanted to add a submit vulnerability button to the report empty state. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but the people who implemented it did. So this is an issue. We have various labels on it. So this one is, it was in verification with last checked. It tells you which team it was in, the Thread Insights team. It tells you it's a feature, not a bug fix. And then it's got a screenshot of related to it. And the issues went from, you can see when it changed from refinement a month ago to verification a month ago, people talking about it and collaborating on it. And what merge request, when it was in development, when it was in review. This is one that you can click over and see exactly when if you want. And then, so these are the issues tracking the work. I think this is part of an epic as well. So I could go to the epic here. The epic is part of manually creating a vulnerability, of which has many different issues that it breaks down to. But jumping back to this specific merge request, sorry, this issue, let's see, it was related to some other issues and had 2 merge requests. I'm going to open up these. Let me bring up this one. So this actually has the code change in it. Actually, this person did a little recorded demo of it so that it could be when it was validated. And automated test cases ran here. Let's see, we'll see that here as the Savash, who is on one of my teams who happened to do the work, got some feedback on it. Like in this case, he actually commented on himself. It was feedback to himself. This is who was recommended to review it, be a reviewer of it and a maintainer of it based on the type of change. We have a bot that does that and looks at the change. This turned out it had a back-end change and a front-end change. So it was reviewed by both sets. In this case, you know, there's feedback where different people on the team had some feedback on it and they talked about it. Some automated test cases talking about the size, the reliability, and you can kind of see this go through the process of, it went from once it was merged. Let's see if I can find, didn't do the search. That's not going to find it as quickly as I'd like. But look at the last couple of labels. After it was merged, when it went from staging, it went into staging Canary, then it went from ImDev to the staging Canary environment. Then it went from to Canary, then it went to production, from staging to production. Looks like we didn't feature flag this one. You can kind of see how that all kind of processes on an issue and merge request basis. I also wanted to show a little bit here from, so that's going through one team, our kind of code review process is sacred to us on how you get your merge request reviewed, approved, and merged. And we've got all sorts of things which helps not only our employees work something through the process, but community contributors who make changes and contribute them. And it talks about all the different details, approval guidelines, and I'll bring up one in particular. You can see in this one here, the MR acceptance checklist, where we make the author do that, goes to a specific part of this. And I'm very familiar with this because I helped improve it. There's an acceptance checklist that the authors go through. Have they self-reviewed the MR for the code review guidelines? I'll just pick some out. Have they separated out enterprise free features from non-free features? Have they checked for performance? Have they checked availability risks? Have they included the documentation team to update documentation? Have, et cetera, going down the list to really help them make their changes safe. Do they look through this list on every change for every detail? No, but they go through the training on this when they start, and they do review this from time to time because it's good to do to make sure you're keeping an eye on all the things that are important. That's the life cycle of a code change at GitLab. Which I know I went through quite a bit. Nice thing is I'm gonna send the slides out afterwards, and you can, everything I'm showing today, you can actually review yourself, both the documentation and the high level process, but also what this team or other teams are up to in terms of the work that they do that's public. Not all the work that all teams do are public, of course, but quite a bit of it is. Any questions or comments? So development processes, I talked about most of this already, but some specific things, and Jerry and others asked some questions around this. Development teams have one manager and less than or equal to 8 developers is the goal. They have stable counterparts in product management, the UX team, which does user design and user research and quality. They're not located in the same time zone. We don't try to do that at all. They primarily communicate asynchronously. They do daily stand-ups in Slack. They do monthly planning before releases. We do monthly releases, and I think we've done, I don't know the number. I think since very early at the company, for years, we've done a monthly release every single month. It is pretty cool. We do monthly retrospectives after planning, after each release, that should say after this typo. They do weekly planning meetings that have an agenda or recorded and are at alternate times, so everyone has an opportunity to attend. Each engineering manager is a weekly one-on-one with each direct report. And we also have various metrics we use to help gauge how teams are doing and get feedback on them. Team merge request rate, not per person, but per team, to see how many merge requests they're doing per month and see if that's what's expected. Work breakout by type, features, maintenance, and bugs. Past due infrastructure and security issues. We set SLOs based on the severity of the issue. Error budgets, 360 reviews, culture surveys, OKRs. I didn't put NPS surveys in here. We do with customers, but we do that as well. So that's some things we do. And I actually already showed you some of the examples of some of the graphs that we have on how we track these on merge requests per month, per team member, and error budgets and things like that. Questions or comments on this? One thing I put in here, wanted to mention, is incentivizing changes from others. Is one of our tenets at GitLab is that everyone can contribute, whether you're actually an employee or the general public and want to contribute. A customer, maybe, or maybe not even a customer. And that's both to our handbook and how we operate as a company and the product itself, and the documentation and other things. So teams don't need to wait on other teams at GitLab to succeed. They can ask another team to do work that they need. Let's say, team X needs to store some data that team Y supports, and they need a new field in that data. They can ask that team to do that, but they don't need to. They can do it themselves, and it goes through the review process when they do it. And maintainers and reviewers on that team, on the team receiving the change, will review it and give them feedback. This really unlocks a lot of productivity, whether that change is coming from another team of employees inside GitLab or from the open source community. If someone sees something they don't like, they can put in an MR, a merge request to change it. And we also celebrate open source contributors. We have a hero program for that to encourage, because we're an open source product, we encourage people to do that, whether they're customers or, again, not customers and just like working on open source things. They're using GitLab for free, which is one of the definite options for users. And it works out quite well.
When you have a question in the chat, can you elaborate a little on the culture surveys?
Culture surveys of employees, or I guess of employees, yes. So we use a vendor called CultureAmp to facilitate that. They're okay at what they do. They're good at what they do. There are other good choices too. And we use some I think we do that every 6 months. And we use a lot of standard questions that are used across many companies, so we can kind of benchmark ourselves against other companies. And we also have GitLab specific questions in there. Like, it's things like, would you recommend a friend work at the company? Don't quote me on these questions. I don't remember the exact ones. Or, do you feel supported by your manager? Questions along those lines. Do you think the company's best days are ahead of it? All sorts of things like that. And I believe it's every 6 months, and we take these things very seriously. They're anonymous. We don't give any feedback to managers unless they get more than 5 results, so they can't be tracked back to the people. But then we give the aggregated results, and we're transparent about it inside the company. And we then take action items from them to improve things. Like one thing that I'm working on across development, my teams and others, is we did one of these culture surveys. And one of the pieces of feedback is that the team members in the Asia Pacific region sometimes felt left out in meetings, because some meetings were in fact not done at different times. So they could attend it live if they wanted to. And it's actually something I'm working on, is getting back to those who organize those meetings, say, you're getting feedback specifically from Asia Pacific that the times are good for the Americas time zones and Europe, but not for other places. So can you work on this? And they may have gotten that feedback before or not, but we got that feedback from the CultureAmp survey. That's one of the things we wanted to improve upon, because we do have quite a bit of people around the world, and that really helps us improve things. We've thought about doing things that are more timely, but also not intrusive. You can't ask people too often for feedback, or they'll give it less. They'll take it less seriously and give it less often. Of sentiment analysis, of looking at what people say, and then try to guess how happy they are or not with machine learning. We haven't done any of those things, but we've considered doing that. And what helps on a more timely basis every 6 months is the retrospectives, where teams give feedback on it's not on how things are going with them personally, it's how things are going with the team. We also have a culture of doing not only one-on-ones weekly, each person should have with their manager, but also skip levels. I do a skip level with all the direct reports of my direct reports. And that's part of the company culture, to get feedback on how things are going and on their manager. And that helps as well. It's a great question. Were there any other questions in chat or that people want to verbalize?
I kind of had one around when you have cross team work, that you have if you have something that traditionally is done by another team, and you say, well, don't wait for that team to do it. You can kind of pick it up and do it. Do you make sure you invite somebody from that core team to do a code review?
Yeah, that's actually exactly, and that's how the reviewer process works. Generally, the reviewer is somebody on the team that is receiving the change, doing the review and doing the code review and commenting on the code and anything else around it, like the why on the change, the issue it came from, the epic it came from, et cetera. It's exactly what we do.
Excellent. Thank you.
It helps that GitLab is primarily a monolith, one big code base, and everybody knows. Most people know the languages. It's JavaScript and Vue on the front end and Ruby on Rails on the back end, with some Golang and Python sprinkled in. So it helps that we don't have a multitude of different languages that only a subset of people know. That is one of the monoliths have many positives and many negatives in terms of being able to execute in an agile perspective. This is one of the positives, is that that allows us to do that.
Well, it's an interesting point because I think it's almost like you're reading my mind. So we have a monolithic structure, and all I hear is we need to break up the monolith. We need to break up the monolith, and we're spending a lot of gyrations doing that, and I'm still trying to find out why. What's our bonus? I mean, the business has been running for years just fine. What's the incentive? What is our end game here? What's our goal? What's is it making us bigger, better, faster? So yeah, this is cool.
And you can break up the monolith into using microservices or other things when doing it, and keep it in the same technologies or not.
As long as you don't create silos of people that do one thing
can
only.
create silos. Microservices can also help you scale better. It can help manage error budgets differently, but it is not a panacea where a monolith is bad and
Absolutely.
a microservices architecture is good. They have their pros and cons in various scenarios, and neither is perfect in all ways, in my opinion, at least.
Thanks. I didn't want to take it too far off the rails, but thanks. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
that's a great question. And some other interesting resources. GitLab Guide to All Remote is a great one. And also we are hiring across all sorts of different teams, and we hire all across the world, not just in New England, of course, but elsewhere. And if you want to find out more about me or how to contact me, feel free to use any of these links or to do that. So thank you. Were there any other questions or comments or thoughts?
One thing that I caught my attention, Wayne, was there was a lot of emphasis in the company culture. When you talked about diversity and inclusion and how the company deals with working across multiple time zones. So what I heard was that there's a commitment to asynchronous communication. Or another buzzword or another observation or another thing that I heard was the positive intent, like listening with positive intent. So on those two areas, any tip that you can share with the audience to like, how does GitLab practice listening with positive intent, and how do they live by that commitment, or how do they practice?
I'll give an example
Go ahead.
from me from yesterday. So somebody in a written communication, in a note, said to me, gave me some information and said, do I need to send you the link? Question mark. And I thought, oh my gosh, that sounds like I'm being accused of not knowing where to find things. That was my first inclination of like, I don't know what I'm doing. And felt like, a read the manual moment that somebody was throwing at me. And it was somebody that I respect their opinion a lot. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to assume that. I'm going to go discuss it with them to see what they really meant. And they did not mean, go read this thing that you should have read before, even though their words could have said that, could have been interpreted. It was, can I help you find this? Because it's hard to find, is what they said. And I said, that's great. Thank you. I didn't say the words, I assume positive intent, but it's like, I assume that's how I interpret is not what you meant. But by the way, so-and-so, how your words could have been interpreted is X, which really could have ticked somebody off, right? And that's not what you intended. They appreciate that. He's like, no, I didn't mean that at all. I'll be more careful on that in the future, because it's really easy for written communication to have that kind of assumption be made when it wasn't wasn't intended. Or in another case, 2 days ago, released a tidbit of information earlier than what was expected. And someone gave me some feedback saying, hey, we weren't going to say that yet. We're not ready to say X yet. And I said, well, it's one word is what I gave back to them. And by the way, I released it early to try to make your life easier, so you didn't have to do it yourself. And they said, you know what? I didn't realize that's why you did it. I appreciate it. You know, so they assumed positive intent. I did too. Was it perfect? Right? Like, I think they were, I gave them feedback. I thought they were being a little bit too, it was one word. It was really hard to misinterpret. I didn't really think it leaked information early. And I told them that. They didn't agree with me, but we just decided to agree to disagree and move on. But I understood where they were coming from, because also they said, well, the last time we did something like that, not you, Wayne, it actually did make somebody very unhappy. So I'm very concerned. I'm very cautious on those things. That's the person gave me that feedback. And I said, yep, I get it. Now I know where you're coming from. And I said, well, you know, I think the chances of that with this are very small. And they agreed, not zero, but small. But, you know, we had a good conversation about it and assumed positive intent. And, you know, it all works out. And it's also about having relationships with people before you need them. Like the two people I mentioned, I know them well. And you can't know everybody that you're going to work with and interact with, but like I know them on a personal level. So that helps with assuming positive intent as well. I know about their hobbies and because they want to talk about them. Or they have behind them a bunch of Legos on their shelf, and you know, we got to talk about Legos. You know, if somebody else really likes a certain kind of bourbon, and I happen to know that, you know, it's not something for me, it's something that's really important to them. So because we have those relationships and know each other a bit, it helps when there's disagreements.
Thank you.
We also try to be really vulnerable and transparent. So that's some vulnerable and transparent things, and they're very recent for me in the last couple of days. Other questions or feedback? Thanks for the feedback, Nancy. I see that in chat now. Okay, great. And Pepe, I will send you the slides so you can make them available to the group.
All right. So then let's sort of do the remaining question before you take off. And then I'll share the results with you. All right. Wayne, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. What were the results of the poll? I think I missed it.
Oh,
there we go. It's in the chat. So 74% have documented values. If they have documented values, do you live by them? 10% totally, 45% mostly, 45% work in progress. And thanks for the feedback on the talk. Looks like lots of 4s and 5s.
yeah.
And if you didn't like it and you want to reach out to me privately and give me that feedback, I'd love to hear it. What you didn't like as well.
Yep.
Looks like a couple 2s and 3s. Thankfully, no 1s. But some 2s and 3s. So sorry for that. But if you have feedback from me, I'd love to hear it.
All right. So I stopped sharing the polls. Wayne, I will gladly share the results. And very likely one of my colleagues at Agile New England is going to request the slides. So just be on the alert for it. So Nancy's also asking how we may be in touch with you. I cut it and pasted some of the links that you shared earlier. If I missed,
Great, and I also shared my email address as well. I think I meant to send it to everybody. I just sent it to Sherry, but feel free to share that to everyone, Sherry.
Excellent. All right. Any other question before we close it? We're pretty on time. So that's pretty amazing. And again, Wayne, I really want to say, again, thank you for joining us and keeping us engaged. I found it very interesting. I was expecting to hear a little bit more about the distributed teams, but it starts with the culture. So I like that.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a great day.